What time did they finish? About 6:40. Okay.
Whatever you want. It's got to be this way.
Huh?
Can't be like that.
This one's gonna be.
Forget about that. It's got to be going this way. So I can really hear you.
Testing.
in your way?
Testing.
No singing. Too early. Good to see you.
You too. Imagine-
You good?
Everything's good. Yeah. How are you? Huh?
What time is it?
Morning. How are you?
Cool.
Good. Sure.
You good?
Good. Josh told me we're up to the Mishnah.
Yes.
Let's get started. 55. No? Okay.
I mean,
If it's too loud, you could turn it on.
What?
Get used to this. I can't set up with my fingers.
Yeah, Jeremy and I have a different sense of it.
Maishi, if it's too loud,
Yeah.
if it's too loud, you'll tell me.
Yeah.
I could start. Okay, the Talmud Torah of today is sponsored by Adam and Yudit Benzev in honor of their children, Jake Sarina and Rosie. And the week of learning is from the friends of the Pacinos. We'd like to wish them Mazel Tov and Atzeschem L'Shalom. Although we are sad to see them go, we cannot be happier for you to embark on the next stage of your life. Okay, we are Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, about to start the last parak. So there's just a short Tosas over here who explains that the Masechta kind of goes in order. That first we started with the first 7 days before Yom Kippur. And then we talked about Leil Yom Kippur, and then we talked about the Avoda on Yom Kippur. And then the last parak talks about the different halachas, about what you can eat, what you can't eat, the different inuyim, different restrictions on Yom Kippur itself. Okay, so the Mishnah says, Yoma Kippurim asar b'achila u'b'shtiya v'rechitza. On Yom Kippur, a person is not allowed to eat, not allowed to drink, not allowed to wash, v'sicha, not allowed to anoint himself, v'neilas hasandal, not allowed to wear shoes, uv'tash b'shamita, he's not allowed to have relations. V'melech v'hakala, yirchetzu es pneim. There's a heter for a king and for a kala, a lady who just got married within 30 days, to wash her face. V'chaya tinol es hasandal, divrei Eliezer. And a lady who just had a baby is allowed to wear shoes, because Rashi explains that the coldness of the floor could be bad for her, so therefore there's a leniency for her that she's allowed to wear shoes. The Chachamim Osrin, and the Chachamim don't allow for these exceptions. Ha'ochel kikoseves hagasa, kemoa ukigarnisa. A person who eats the size of a dried fig, kamoa ukigarnisa, it and its seeds. So this is going to be a whole Gemara. Yirtzeh Hashem, I'll be back next Tuesday. Going to be talking about how exactly to read this line. A shosa mali lugmav chayiv, and a person who drinks a mali lugmav, which means a cheekful, is chayiv. In other words, that's the shear where the person was over on the isser of eating or drinking on Yom Kippur. Kala ochlin mitzdarfen l'kekoseves, a person who eats different types of foods, takes one bite of this cereal and a different bite of something else, that all adds together for the shear of koseves. A person who drinks different drinks, that all adds together to make up the shear of a malei lugma. The ochel v'shose ein mitzdarfen. But a person who eats a little bit and drinks a little bit, the two don't add up to make one shear. There's two different tracks. There's an achila track, an eating track, and a shtia track, a drinking track. Says the Gemara, Asr anash karisu. Why are you telling me I'm not allowed to eat and drink, etc.? That sounds like it's just forbidden. The Gemara is bothered that you're really chayiv kares. Person is obligated in kares if he does that. So the Mishnah should have said much more than asr, it's forbidden. Forbidden sounds like it's just forbidden. But if you're chayiv something much, much worse, then the Mishnah should have said that. So Amr Rabbi Loi, B'Tei Rabbi Yirmiyah lo nitzcha ela l'chatzi shir. The reason the Mishnah said the word usr is because you can have a case where the person is not obligated in kares. The only thing it is an isser. It's forbidden. What's that case? If he ate chatzi shir. So chatzi shir means if a person eats less than the shir that the Torah asert. So let's say by a normal, let's say a person is not allowed to eat bugs. A person is not allowed to eat blood. Okay, so the shir to be chayiv, let's say malchus, lashes, is if you eat a kazayas. That's the definition of eating, the Torah's prohibition of eating blood, eating bugs. Chatzi shir would mean if a person took a little bite, even though it's much, much less than a kazayas, it's still going to be an isser. So we'll see what's the strength of that isser. Is that an isser d'oraisa or that's an isser d'rabbanan? But the Gemara was bothered. Why did the Mishnah say that if you eat and drink on Yom Kippur, it's usser, you're really chayiv kares, it's much, much worse. So the Gemara's answer is, the Mishnah said the word usser because there's the case where you only did an isser, you're not chayiv kares. What's that case? If you ate less than the shir. So by Yom Kippur, the shir was either koseves or mali lugmav for eating or drinking. So if a person ate less than that, he's not chayiv kares, but it's still usser. Hani chalamanta amar chatzi shir asur min haTorah. Says the Gemara, that's a good answer if you hold that eating less than the shir is forbidden from the Torah. But a person who holds, right now the Gemara is assuming that it's 100% mutter. It's allowed to eat less than the shir. So then how did you answer your question? Your answer to the question was it said usser because it was talking when he ate less than the amount. We're saying that only works if you're not allowed to eat less than the amount. But if you're allowed to eat less than the amount, so then why did it say usser? To eat marchatzi shir Rabbi Yochanan amar usser min haTorah. Rabbi Yochanan says there's an isser from the Torah to eat less than the shir. Rish Lakish amar mutar min haTorah. Rish Lakish held no, that when the Torah says if you eat this with the shir you are obligated, it means less than that is mutar. So anichal Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish meikal meimar. We're saying you answered your question in Rabbi Yochanan because I'll read the Mishnah means. If you eat less than the amount, it's still prohibited. That's why the Mishnah just said prohibited. It didn't say chayiv kares. But according to Reish Lakish, who holds that it's mutter, it's allowed, so why did the Mishnah say asr? So Mo, the Reish Lakish, asr m'derabbanan. The Gemara says no, even Reish Lakish, who says that it's mutter from the Torah to eat less than the shir, agrees that midrabbanan you're not allowed to. So we can answer the Mishnah and everybody. The reason the Mishnah said it's prohibited and didn't say you're chayiv kares is because it's talking less than the shir. In Rabbi Yochanan, it's an isser d'oraisa from the Torah. And in Reish Lakish, it's an isser midrabbanan. It's a rabbinic isser. Ihachi lo nechayiv ala karban shvua. Gemara says if Reish Lakish agrees that it's prohibited midrabbanan to eat, so that a person shouldn't be chayiv a karban shvua. So we have to keep tabs for a little bit. So what's the Gemara coming at? Lama Tanan. We learned in a Mishnah, shvua shelo ochal va'achal nevelos treifish katzim b'ramasim. A person who took a shvua to not, he swore to not eat things that he can't eat anyway. Okay, a person sitting in front of a cheeseburger and he says, I swear that I won't eat it. Okay, so there's a power of shavua and adarim in the Torah, that a person can create new prohibitions on himself. But here the person tried to prohibit something that's already prohibited. He's sitting in front of a McDonald's cheeseburger and he says, I swear I won't eat this. So Reb Shimon poter. So sorry, chayiv. The Tanna Kama says if he then eats it, he transgressed his shvua. Reb Shimon poter. Reb Shimon says he did something wrong. He shouldn't have eaten the cheeseburger, but he didn't transgress of this shvua. Okay, so we have to figure out what's this machlokas. We have a machlokas, Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon. If a person swears to not eat something prohibited, and then he ate it, Tanna Kama says he transgressed the shvua, and Reb Shimon says not. Vavinan ba, and the Gemara there asked, Amai chayiv, mushba va'omed me'ar sinaihu. How can a person be chayiv for such a shvua? He's already prohibited in that item. So meaning, what the Gemara is asking is if you're already prohibited from the Torah to not eat something, So then you don't have a power for the shavua to be chal, to go on that same exact item. So we're confused. What is the case that they're talking about that the Tanakama could say you're chayiv? Rav Vishmov Rabbi Yochanan de Amri. So they answered, what's the case of that Mishnah? Damri bekolol dvarim hamutarim dvarim asur. The case is the person said, I won't eat kosher things and treif things. So why does that help? There's a svara to say that since his shavua is working to prohibit him on the mutter, on the permissible things, so since it can get in the door, so to speak, so then it's able to go even on the cheeseburger, which he's not allowed to eat. In other words, if you just try to make it on the cheeseburger, it doesn't work. But here the Tanakama is saying, if you said I won't eat Cheerios and a cheeseburger, since it's going to prohibit the person in the Cheerios, it's going to stop him also in the cheeseburger. Okay. And Reb Shimon, who said he's exempt, is disagreeing with that point. So a person, they're saying the case is a person said, I won't eat this cheeseburger and this bowl of cereal. Tanakama says, since it's the shvua works for the cereal, it works for the cheeseburger, and Reb Shimon disagrees. So now the person goes and eats the cheeseburger. Tanakama says he's chayiv. He went against the shvua. Reb Shimon says the shvua didn't work for the cheeseburger. He's already prohibited to eat the cheeseburger. Reish Lakish said, explaining that Mishnah, Iyat hamotzi elabim afarish chatzi shir, baliba derabbanon, o bestam baliba derabbi kiva. Amar adam oser atzma b'kol shehu, top of Ayin Dala. So the way Reish Lakish explained that Mishnah is that it's talking where a person said, I won't eat less than the shear. In other words, I won't eat even a little bit of this cheeseburger, less than the shear kezayis. Or even stam, without saying it, according to Rabbi Akiva's opinion, that a person's referring to even a little amount. So in other words, Reish Lakish said, the way I'll explain that Mishnah is a person said, I won't eat even a little bit of the cheeseburger. Tanakama says, therefore, if he eats it, he's chayiv. And Reb Shimon, who holds, Reb Shimon disagrees and says that when you can't eat a cheeseburger, even a little bit is included in the prohibition, and therefore the shvua doesn't have any ability to add any more isser onto it. So what the Gemara is bothered by is like this. We just said that Rabbi Yochanan holds you can't eat less than the shear, less than the amount of kazayas, minater. And we said, and even Reish Lakish agrees, midirabbanan, you can't eat less than the shear. That means when the Torah makes a prohibition, it says if you eat this, a kazayas, then you're obligated in malchus. Reish Lakish agrees, midirabbanan, you can't eat less. So the Gemara's challenging is that Reish Lakish explained that Mishnah by saying the case was the person swore to eat less, a little bit, one bite of the cheeseburger. So if you would tell me a person's allowed to eat one bite of the cheeseburger, then I understand. But if you tell me that even midrabbanan, he's not allowed to eat it, so then how is the shavua able to go on to that item he's already prohibited to eat it? Right? We said if a person can't eat this item anyway, then a shavua can't go on to it. So if you tell me in Reish Lakish he can't eat it midrabbanan, so we should be back to the same problem. So the Gemara is saying it sounds from here that Reish Lakish, who holds that chatzi shir is not prohibited from the Torah, it would sound like he holds they didn't even make it into Rabbanan. He would hold it's mutter. Maybe you'll answer me that since midaraisa I can eat less, a little bite of this cheeseburger, it's only midarabbanan I can't. So maybe Reish Lakish will say, since from the Torah I can eat a little bite of the cheeseburger, so my shvua will be able to prohibit me from the Torah to eat a little bite of the cheeseburger. You're right, midrabbanan, rabbinically I can't eat it, but there's always two planes, right? I'm sitting in front of the cheeseburger. From the Torah I can take a bite. So I take a shvua, I swear to not even take a bite. You're right, in the background there's a rabbinic prohibition, but maybe the shvua is able to go onto it because min haTorah I can eat it. But not, but we learned in a Mishnah, shvua se'edis eino nohegis ela b'ru'in lahayid. Shvua se'edis is a person who people come to testify, and he takes a shvua. He swears he doesn't know anything, and then it turns out he really does. So Shavuos ha'edus eino helix b'rein lahayir. A person's only chayiv to bring that carbon if he was somebody who was able to testify. Vavinan ba, and we asked lemu'ute mai, to what is that Mishnah coming to exclude? Which person who was not able to testify is exempt from that carbon? Rav Papa amar lemutei melech. Rav Papa said to the exclusion of a melech. Rav Acha bar Yaakov amar lemutei mesachek b'kuvya. Person is what we would call a gambler, which Chazal said is a gazlan midirabanan. He's not able to testify midirabanan. But that person, that gambler, from the Torah is able to testify. Why can't he testify? Only midirabanan. And we still see that the Shavua didn't work. So the Gemara is saying, you tried to suggest that since from the Torah I can eat a little bite of the cheeseburger, therefore my Shavua to not eat it can work, even though midirabanan I can't eat a bite of the cheeseburger. So what the Gemara is challenging is that we have a Mishnah that says that if a person who can't testify midirabanan, that means he walks into the room. From the Torah, he's really fine to testify. But midirabanan, rabbinically, he can't testify. Now he comes and he swears and then he admits that he really knows eidos. So if a person's a good kosher aid, is a good witness, so then he's chayav a carbon. Now this person from the Torah is really a good aid, a good witness. But still the Mishnah says, since rabbinically, midirabanan, he's not a good aid, so therefore he's exempt from the Torah's obligation to bring that carbon. So you see that the way we deal with it is that even though from the Torah he's okay, since rabbinically he's not okay, he's not included in that parsha to be chayav the carbon. The Gemara is saying so too here. Even though you're right, from the Torah I can eat a bite of the cheeseburger, but if Reish Lakish holds midirabanan I can't, so then I don't think the shvua to say, the swear that I'm making to say I won't eat even a bite should be able to go in the cheeseburger if midirabanan I can't eat it. So my answer is no. Shiny hasam damar koim lo yagid v'hailav bar hagadahu klal. So over there was a special drasha to include somebody who even can't testify midirabanan, but really we were right originally. Reish Lakish can agree that eating less than the shear is prohibited midirabanan. Just Reish Lakish holds that since mid'oraisa from the Torah I can eat less one bite of the cheeseburger, therefore the shavua, which is prohibiting me even on that one bite, has the ability to be chal, has the ability to go on to that. Okay, so just to summarize, we have a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Anytime the Torah writes a shear, gives a measurement for the time that a person eats something to be chayiv. Right? So by most prohibitions, a person has to eat a kazayas in order to be chayiv. The malchus, the lashes for eating it. So Rabbi Yochanan says, but less than the shear's aser, still prohibited min Torah. We'll see where he's coming from to say that. And Reish Lakish said it's mutter from the Torah, but the Gemara is clarifying he agrees that it's prohibited midirabanan. Okay, says the Gemara about 12 lines down ayin daled. Kol heicha detani onesh karis lo tani aser. So the Gemara's original question was assuming that if the Mishnah said aser, prohibited, it sounds like there's no karis, which is worse. Gemara's challenging, is that really a good diak? Is that really a good question? Vatanya, we learned in a brayso, afal pisha amru aser bekulon, even though we said the person's not allowed to do all of these things on Yom Kippur, lo amru anush karis ella ala ochel v'shose melachal bavad. The only times person's chayiv kares is by eating, drinking, and doing malacha. So it sounds like from the brayso, it's willing to use the word aser going on all of those things. Doesn't sound like it's bothered with what the Gemara was bothered by. Because it's saying even though all of those are aser, but kares is only by some of them. But it's willing to use the word prohibited by even things which are chayiv kares. So the Gemara's original diak was the Mishnah said aser. It's really much worse. It's chayiv kares. The Gemara is challenging. Who says that's a good question? Maybe the Mishnah would use the word aser even for something which is chayiv karis. Gemara says no. Hachi kamer. This is the way you read the brisa. Kisha amru aser lo amru ala b'chatzi shir. When they said aser, I mean, what the brisa is clarifying is when we said aser, that was if you ate chatzi shir. Aval kashir onush karis. But if you ate the shir, then you're chayiv karis. But even though you're chayiv kares, it's only by eating, drinking, and doing malachas. The Gemara is saying no. The way they read the brisa is consistent with the way we were saying before. That it wouldn't say the word aser, prohibited, on something which is really much worse than just being aser, kares. And therefore, that's how you'll read the brisa. Okay, ve'ibay seima. This is a new answer to the original question. Katani aser ashara. The reason the Mishnah said the word aser, our first answer was because it was coming to say if you ate less than the shear, there's no kares, it's just aser. Second answer is no. Katani aser ashara. The reason the Mishnah said the word aser, you're right, by eating, drinking, it's really much worse than aser, it's chayiv kares. But the Mishnah said the word aser for the rest. In other words, for the rechitza, the sicha, nilas asandal, the other prohibitions in the Mishnah, those, the Gemara is saying, are not chayiv kares. That's why the Mishnah just said the word aser, and once it was putting it in the whole list, so it said the word aser for all of them, even though the eating and the drinking is really worse than aser. The Tani Rab of Rav Yosef B'Shar Sifrei Devei Rav, Minayin Liyom Kippurim she'aser b'rechitza b'sicha v'nilas asandal v'tasher shemita. How do you know on Yom Kippur that a person can't wash, anoint, wear shoes, and have relations? Tamalam Shabbason Shvus, which Rashi explains, that type of drasha we know from other places. Sounds like a din d'Rabbanan. Therefore, the Gemara is bringing that as a source, that it's not really prohibited min Torah, or at least they're not chayiv kares by those other things. It's a discussion in the Rishonim if those other prohibitions of rechitza, v'sicha, etc., are prohibited min Torah or Yom Kippur. Just there's no kares, or are they really only isurim d'Rabbanan? Okay, gufa chati shir. Yochanan Amar Asa min HaTorah, Reish Lakish Amar Mutter min HaTorah. Rabbi Yochanan says to eat less than a shir is prohibited min HaTorah, and Reish Lakish says it's mutter min HaTorah. But the Gemara clarified before, he agrees either Rabbanan you're not allowed to. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asa min HaTorah. Given the chazi litztarufi isura ka'achal. Since it's chazi litztarufi, the little bite of the cheeseburger a person's eating could add up to the kazayas, which is the shear, the amount for the iser of eating treif. Given the chazi litztarufi isura ka'achal. Rabbi Yochanan says that it sounds like a svara, that if you're going to tell me when I finish eating the tiny little bites of the cheeseburger, I ended up doing an iser of eating a kazayas of the cheeseburger, so then that means each bite is iser, because it's adding up to make one big iser. Rish Lakish Amar Mutter min HaTorah. Rish Lakish says, no, I think it's Mutter min HaTorah. Achila Amar Achmona v'leka. The definition of eating is kazayas. It means if you don't eat a kazayas, it's mutter. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks a question of Rish Lakish. Ein li ela kol sheyeshna ba'onish. Okay, so this is the psukim by Chaylev. Okay, so we have one pasuk by Chaylev which says you're not allowed to eat Chaylev. And then another pasuk says a person who eats Chaylev gets punished. So ainli ala kol sheyeshna ba'onish yeshna basara. All I would know is people who are included in the punishment of eating Chaylev are included in the prohibition. So this next word, I heard different opinions on how to say it. Either kvi or koi. V'chatzi shir. So I mean it's a type of an animal. What does article say? Koi. Koi. So it's a type of animal which we're not sure if it's a chaya, a wild animal, or a behema, a domestic animal. Chatzi shir. So if a person eats the chayla from that animal, or chatzi shir, so this is what we're going to be paying attention to, or eats less than the amount of shir of chaylev, hoel ve'eno ba'onesh, since he's not chayiv the onesh, yachal eno b'ashara. So I would say maybe he's not chayiv, it's not usher to eat it. Talmud Lomer, no, kol chaylev. Since the pasuk by the lav said kol chaylev, it's coming to include even these cases. The case which is a suffix, we're not sure if it's a behema or a chaya, because the chaylev of a chaya, of a wild animal's mutter, the chaylev of a behema's aser. So if we have an animal, we're not sure The Gemara right now saying we're learning from the pasuk that's prohibited, and included in the brisa was if you eat chatzi shir, less than the shir. So Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, I'll prove to you that it's prohibited min Torah to eat less than the shir, because the brisa included, it was talking about a pasuk, and it included in the case if a person eats less than the shir, we're learning from the pasuk that it's prohibited. So how can you tell me that it's mutter min Torah to eat less than the shir? So Reish Lakish says midrabanan kras machtava alma. I'll tell you that brisa didn't mean a din d'oraisa, it really meant a din d'rabbanan. Hachanami mistabra, I'll prove it to you. These halkadaitach d'oraisa. If you're going to tell me that it's a din d'oraisa, koi sveikahu, itzrich kra lasu yisveika. You're going to tell me it's a din d'oraisa. So this animal, we're not sure what it is. But if you ask Hashem, Hashem would be able to answer the question. The Gemara is saying that we would need a pasuk to tell us how to deal with something that's a suffix, something that we're not sure. If Hashem knows the answer, what it is, so it's either a wild animal or a domestic animal. We wouldn't need another pasuk to come to say that since we happen to not know it's prohibited or it's allowed, it's included in one of the other two categories. We happen to just not know where it fits. So Reish Lakish is saying that would be a raya. The Gemara is really talking midrabanan. Says the Gemara, Mishum halo irya. That's not a great raya because kasavri koi beri b'fnei atzmahi. I could tell you really we're talking d'oraisa, and the reason the brisa needed to include koi from a pasuk is because it held that it doesn't have the status of not being sure if it's a behemoth or a chaya. It has a status of beri b'fnei atzma. It has a din of its own entity, and therefore it doesn't fit into one of the two categories. And because that's true, you would need another pasuk to come to include to you that that's going to be usher. If you don't accept that, Hada Amar Ravidi Bar Avin, the memra of Ravidi Bar Avin, which was Af Kol Asuye Koi. So this was saying when the pasuk says you can't eat dam, so it said by birds and by behema. So he had a pasuk saying it even includes this type of koi, which is we're not sure if it's a behema or a chaya. Koi sveikahu, it's shachrel or sveika. You should ask her in his halacha. Why do you need a pasuk to come to include this type of animal? Elaber yashayni. You're going to tell me that since it's defined as an undefined status, and therefore it doesn't fit into either category, and therefore you need another pasuk to come to include that it's asur. So Achanami ber yashayni, I'll say the same thing. Even if this brisa was talking d'oraisa, maybe the brisa held it has an undefined status, and therefore you would need another pasuk to come to include to me that it's asur. Okay, just an interesting thought, just to think about. Rabbi Yochanan said that it's prohibited from the Torah to eat less than the shear because chazilitz tarufi, because it can be added up to the full isser. Okay, so just something to think about. How can you have a case in Rabbi Yochanan that you're eating less than the shear that's asr, that's really mutter from the Torah? His svara that it's asr was since it can add up, then when it adds up, I'm going to be asr. Right? I start eating the cheeseburger. If I keep eating, when I get to the kzayis, I did an isser. So says Rabbi Yochanan, I think each bite's asr. Okay, so how can we have a case where it's not relevant to his svara of chazilitz tarufi that it can add up? Okay, just food for thought. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, ta'anu is not sheseichem. The Brisa says, a person in Yom Kippur needs to afflict his nefesh. So what does that mean, afflict your nefesh? Yachol yashav bechama o betzina. Says the Gemara, maybe I should go and proactively make myself uncomfortable. How do you do that? Go sit in the sun. Go sit in the cold. No, because it also says by Yom Kippur you shouldn't do malacha. Ma malacha sheval taisi. Just like that means stop yourself from doing malacha. Meaning I want to go turn on the light. The Torah says to me, stop yourself from doing the malacha. So too, we understand that the other mitzvah in Yom Kippur of ta'anu es nafshe seichem doesn't mean go actively make yourself uncomfortable. It means sheval taisi, which means I want to go eat to make myself more comfortable. Stop yourself. Same way as I want to go turn on the light so that I can see. The Torah says stop yourself from going to turn on the light. So ta'anu es nafshe seichem means I want to go eat, drink, anoint myself to make myself more comfortable, ta'anus nafshe seichem, stop yourself from doing that. Ema hecha di yasef b'shimsha, v'chamim le, lo nema leikum, tov betula. Says the Gemara, I can still have a case similar to that by the sun. Because maybe if he's sitting in the sun and he wants to get up, the Torah says, Sheiv al taisei, don't get up, stay in the hot sun. The original suggestion was maybe I should go actively put myself on the hot, humid day in the sun to be ta'anas nafshe seichem. So Gemara said, you proved that wrong. Maybe it means I happen to be sitting outside and it starts getting hot, and now the Torah says, don't get up. Sheiv al taisei, don't get up. Or Yasef Betula v'karu le lo nema le kumtuv. Or he's sitting in a cold place, he wants to get up. So Tanos Nafshe Seichem would say, don't get up, stay in that place. B'shimsha, no, dum yidam malacha. Says the Gemara, no. It still needs to be similar to malacha. Ma malacha lo chilak daba af ino le tachlak bo. In other words, the fact that you already agreed to me that the person is not obligated to go sit in the hot sun, so that means that's the type of action which can be involved in kumase, going to do something, and sheiv al taisei. So the Gemara is saying, no, the fact that it compared it to malacha still tells us that that type of thing is not included. So rather, what's the definition of inui? Something which is by definition sheiv al taisei. For example, eating and drinking. Right? You should stop it and don't do that to yourself. Tanya idach tanos nafshe seichem. Yachol yeshiv b'chama uvetzina v'yetztayer. Maybe a person should go sit in the sun or the cold and be mitztayer. This is another brisa asking the same question. How do you know tanos nafshe seichem means don't eat and drink? Maybe it means go make yourself uncomfortable. Tamalocha chamalacha lo sasu. Ma malacha davar shechayav alav b'makam acher. Just like malacha is something which a person's chayiv b'makam acher, which means that we know by Shabbos the definition of what it means don't do malacha. So by Yom Kippur, when it says don't do malacha, it means the thing which I asered, I prohibited for you other places, don't do that here. So af inoi nefesh, so too, when the pasuk says afflict yourself, it's shechayav and alav b'makam acher. It means afflict yourself with something that I've told you you shouldn't do somewhere else. Ve'ezez ez a pigel v'nosem. That's the types of foods which a person is not allowed to eat in a different context. So this Bryce is answering the question differently. Saying, how do you know the definition of tanos nafshe seichem means don't eat and drink? Because the same way melacha by Yom Kippur is something which has previously been prohibited. So too, the definition of ta'anos nafshe seichem is not going to introduce to us some new concept called go sit in the sun and make yourself uncomfortable. It's referencing something similar that we've already seen in the Torah, which is types of foods that we already can't eat, like pigel v'noser. So the Gemara says, avi pigel v'noser shehin b'karis. V'lo avi es hatevel shehin b'karis. This is a very interesting havamina. Saying if you said it like that, so then it should come out that the only things a person is not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur is pigel and nosar, which are the most extreme that a person eats at his chayv karis. But if a person ate something less extreme, tevel, I mean something which the trumas maestros has not been separated from, so you're not chayv karis if you eat it, maybe you're allowed to eat that on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara is suggesting maybe the definition of ta'anus nafshe seichem means you can't eat the foods which you already can't eat for a different reason. Maybe it would come out an interesting thing, that the only things the Torah aser on Yom Kippur is things you can't eat anyway. Where it says, no, ta'anu v'nisivs nafshe seichem riba. We're saying that the way the pasuk was written sounds like it's included that case. So the way I understand this, the Gemara is going to ask a series of questions. How do you know to include this food, this food, this food? And it's going to be the same answer each time. So the way I understand it is the Gemara is not saying there's a new pasuk to tell me that it's wrong. It's really the Gemara's way of speaking out that misvara, that's not a good suggestion to make that distinction. In other words, sometimes you only know this. How do you know the next level? And the Gemara will make another drasha. There's another letter, another word coming to teach you even that halacha. Here it sounds to me in the brisa that it's really the same answer over and over. It would sound like the answer is that was not really a good question. Avi tevel shu b'misa v'lavias hanavela she'ena b'misa. Says the Gemara, so maybe you're not allowed to eat tevel, which is misa b'dei shamayim. But how do you know a person's not allowed to eat nevela, which is not even misa b'dei shamayim, it's just a lav? So, I mean, this is what I was pointing out before. It's the same answer. No, the way the pasuk is written sounds like it includes even nevela. Okay, so where are we holding? You can't eat something which is kares or misa b'dei shamayim or even just a lav, a prohibition, on Yom Kippur, like nevela. Obvious hanavela shu b'lav lavis achulun sheinu b'lav. So maybe I'll include nevela, which is a lav, but not include chulun, which is not even a lav. Same answer. No, it sounds like in the way the pasuk is written that you can't even eat something which was chulun. Avi chulun sheinu b'kumachol. Lavi es hatruma shiva kumachol. So maybe you can include in the isser just foods which you're not obligated to eat. But truma, where there's a mitzvah, if you eat it for a kohen to eat the truma, so maybe the Torah is not prohibiting that. That's not included in v'nisam nafshasechem, in afflicting yourself in Yom Kippur. No, tamalom ta'ana v'nisam nafshasechem riba. That's also included. Obvious at truma sheinu b'bal tosiru. So maybe you'll include truma where there's a mitzvah to eat it, but there's no prohibition of the kohen not eating it right away. Obvious at kachim sheinu b'bal tosiru, but kachim where there's a mitzvah to eat it, and the Torah even made a specific time to eat it. You're not allowed to leave it over. So maybe that's not included. No, okay, so what this Bryce is saying is, how do you know to define? Ta'anus nafshaseicha means you can't eat and drink. The answer is that it's only something which we've found that the Torah prohibited in a different place, which is many examples of the prohibition of eating. But the Bryce is clarifying, it's not going to then be limited to the types of foods which we've found are going to be usher in other places. That's going to be a gauge that the definition of the words ta'anos nafshosechem means eating and drinking, and then I have the right to include all types of eating and drinking into the prohibition of ta'anos nafshosechem. Okay, the Bryce continues, v'im nafshach lomar, and if you'll argue, so it sounds like the Bryce is alluding that there's a question or what it said, but even if you'll argue, I have another answer. The pasuk says that if a person doesn't listen, he's not ta'anos nafshasechem, so then he's chayv kares. He'll destroy his nefesh. Inui shehu avedas hanefesh. It sounds like the type of affliction is something which affects his nefesh, his like being alive, which is achila v'shtia, as opposed to sitting in the sun getting very hot. So my v'im nafshach lomar, says the Gemara, what's that Bryce saying? It sounds like, and if you'll argue, I have another answer. So what was the argument on the first logic? Maybe you'll argue, if the whole way you know Tanos nafshosechem isn't sitting in the sun, is because it has to be something that the Torah previously prohibited. So I have something else the Torah previously prohibited. A rayas, person is not allowed to have relations with certain ladies, with certain people, and still, so maybe the definition of ta'anos nafshosechem on Yom Kippur is the same way elsewhere. I prohibited you from having certain relations, so on Yom Kippur, ta'anos nafshosechem. You have to afflict yourself and not have those relations. So the Bryce is answering, no, harehu omer v'avadati nefesh inu sheish b'avedas nefesh. Therefore, the Bryce has said a different reason, a second reason, that said, even if you'll argue that, but I have a different pasuk which sounds like the type of inui is something that affects the person's essence of being alive. That's eating and drinking. Another Bryce. Here by Yom Kippur it said inui, and elsewhere it said the word inui. Malahalon inui ra'avon. Just like over there, the inui was a reference to starvation. Rashi says we're quoting a pasuk in Dvarim, which was talking about Hashem giving Klal Yisrael the mun. It said that they were starving, and then Hashem gave them the mun. So just like the word inui in that pasuk said vaya'ancha, The inoi there meant they were starving, and therefore Hashem gave him food. So afkan inoi rav. So to ta'anu as nafsho seichem, the same word, the definition means starve yourself, don't eat. V'nilav mim ta'anes benosai, says the Gemara, but I found a place in Chumash that Lot said to Yaakov, that if you're ta'anes benosai, which the Gemara understands means if you hold back from them relations, so it's a ta'aneh, and it was a reference to tashmish, to relations. So maybe you should learn from there. The definition of ta'anus nafshos eichem is that there's a prohibition to have relations on Yom Kippur. No, done in inoi de rabim, ain't done in inoi de rabim, inoi de yochim. Mar says it's more mistaber to learn from the mun, which was talking to many people. So to ta'anus nafshos eichem of Yom Kippur is talking to many people, and not learn from the case of Lot talking to Yaakov, which was a specific conversation to a single person. Says the Gemara, I have a place talking to many people, and said the word inoi, dechsiv vayaras hanyenu v'amrinu zu prishas derech eretz. The Klal Yisrael cried out to Hashem and said vayaras hanyenu, and the Gemara understands that means they were saying that they were poresh from tashmish, from having relations. So the Gemara is challenging that if you can learn from a different place in the Chumash, that the definition of the word inoi has to mean eating and drinking, I have another place, which was talking to the rabbim, and it said the word inoi, and it was a reference to relations. So maybe ta'anus nafshaseicha means person's not allowed to have relations on Yom Kippur. So elo donin inoi b'dei shamayim, inoi b'dei shamayim, vein donin inoi b'dei shamayim, inoi b'dei adam. So Gemara says no, there's more mistaber to learn from something which was from shamayim, the mun. So to ta'anus nafshaseicha is a tzivoy, a command from shamayim, and to not learn from the people in Mitzrayim saying something that was their own decision to say that sentence, to not learn from there the definition of the mitzvah of ta'anos nafshosech. Okay, so we have three different brises all coming to answer the same question. How do we know the definition of ta'anos nafshosech is don't eat and drink? So one said you learn from malacha that it has to be shev al taisi, something which is by definition. If you want to do something, Torah says hold back, ta'anos nafshosech. The other said it has to be something which the Torah prohibited somewhere else, like eating and drinking. And the third brisa said that if you look at the different places in the Chumash where it says the word inoi, similar to ta'anu as nafshasechem, that the most logical place to learn from was another place where we see that Shamayim, Hashem was involved in giving Klal Yisrael the mun, and in that context it said that the people were vaya'ancha, which meant that they were starving. So ta'anu means starve yourself, don't eat and drink. Okay, hamachilcha mon b'midbar l'mananoscha. So the Gemara is just bringing a pasuk in Devarim, which says, I gave you the mun and the midbar in order to test you. So the Gemara is bothered by is why is giving the people food, why is that a test for them? So Rav Ami, the test was that it's not so easy to not go into the next day knowing where your food's coming from. So you're right, Hashem gave them food, but it was done in a way that it was testing ultimately their emunah, their trust in Him, that they didn't have anything in the freezer. Every day had to be new food. So that's why I'm giving you the mun, but it's in a way that it's to test you. So one says that it's not the same when a person eats something and he sees what he's eating to a person who eats something and doesn't see what he's eating. As much as the mun had the ability to taste like different things, the fact that it didn't look like those things, the Gemara is saying is not the same level of satiation. So the test was to be able to deal with that aspect. Fascinating thing. Rav Yosef says this is a remez, a hint to people who can't see that they eat and they're not as full. We're saying there's a connection between the person seeing the food that he's eating and how full he gets. Abaye said that a person who has a suda should only eat it by daytime or by candlelight, because there's more of a satiation that comes from a person being able to see his food. It's better what the person can see than the mahalach nefesh, where his mind takes him. Mikra, what's the source for what we just said? That it makes an impact if a person can see the food Because in the pasuk it says tov mar einai mahalach nafesh. That there's a aspect that it's greater in the seeing of the thing than the person's imagination, and therefore seeing the food can have an impact. Amar Reish Lakish tov mar einai beisha yoser migufa shal ma'isa shenemar tov mar einai mahalach nafesh. Reish Lakish, this seems to be a bigger chiddush, but he's saying it's better. There's an aspect that it's better for a person to see, like he gets more benefit from seeing something than actually being involved in the action of the relations, because that pasuk says, Tov mar einai mahalach nafesh, that there's an aspect of the seeing something which a person gets more benefit from than the actual doing it. Okay, we will stop over here.
Well,